Good morning, good evening from all the places you're calling in from. My name is Amy Cooper, and I'm a research assistant for the International and Canadian Children's Rights Partnership Policy Working Group. Today's webinar will be in both English and Portuguese. So unless you are bilingual in both English and Brazilian Portuguese, you will need to take these steps to ensure that your caption language is set to your preferred language. In the meeting controls toolbar, click the Show Captions or CC icon or the three dots that indicate more. And then click the up arrow next to the captions icon to open the settings. Select Translation and choose your preferred language. Click Save if you have that option. The captions will instantly begin appearing in your selected language, independent of what others choose. Thank you for attending this webinar entitled A Relational and Intergenerational Approach to Children's Rights, New Possibilities for Law and Policy. This is the fifth webinar in the ICCRP Working Group series situated at the nexus of children's rights, young people's participation, and law and policy. Today, Policy Working Group co-lead Natasha Blanchet Cohen and I are calling in from Concordia University, located on the unceded indigenous lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. The Kanien'kehá:ka are recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters around Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal. It is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations and remains today a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. It is important to reflect on the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationship with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And we invite you to consider the land you are calling in from, your relationship with it, and the diverse peoples, animals, and biodiversity around you. As part of the International and Canadian Children's Rights Partnership, or ICCRP, we are thrilled to position this discussion as a gathering of different voices and perspectives spanning several continents, languages, time zones, disciplines, and of course, generations. Each sharing insights on how a relational and intergenerational approach can contribute to new insights into children's rights law and policy. From Brazil, we have Liriel Farias, an educator and youth climate negotiator working at the intersection of climate justice, human rights, and anti-racist education. She is studying pedagogy and social work and a member of the research group Baobab Territories and Territorialities. With the International Center for Research and Policy on Childhood, or CSP, she supports research on childhood, peripheral territories, and social environmental inequalities. And as the founder of Coletivo Aie, she develops educational practices committed to social transformation from the peripheries, connecting culture, environment, and youth participation in national and international advocacy spaces. Bom dia, Liriel. Carolina Terra is a social worker in research and a PhD candidate in social work at CSP at Puco Rio, where she takes part in the National Coalition on Early Childhood. Her studies focus on social construction of early childhood and its entry into the public agenda, and her current research explores the relationship between the rights of present and future generations in the climate crisis. Bom dia, Carolina. From Canada, we have Carlos McDonald, who is a dedicated advocate, mentor, and executive director of the World Changer Society, a nonprofit organization focused on supporting youth as they transition from government care to independent adulthood. As a former youth in care and a devoted father, Carlos brings a vital lived experience perspective to policy discussions, bridging the gap between law and real-world outcomes. His work focuses on ensuring youth have consistent caring adults in their lives, aligning with the provincial Stepping Up priority outcomes and collaborating with youth-serving agencies in the region of Peel, Ontario. Carlos brings a deeply relational approach to mentorship, further informed by his background in security, and has a second-degree black belt in karate. Okay. We also have from Canada, Erwin Elman, who is an experienced educator, counselor, youth worker, program manager, policy developer, and youth advocate. He served as Ontario's child advocate from 2008 to 2019, drawing on the strength of young people, working to fill the gap between what government, service providers, and policymakers intend and the reality experienced by some of the most vulnerable children and youth in Ontario, Canada. In 2024, he was made an Officer of the Order of Canada for his intergenerational work ensuring fundamental shifts in the child welfare system, including increased educational supports for children in care and more resources for youth transitioning out of the system. He is currently a senior fellow at the Laidlaw Foundation and president of Defense for Canada for Children International Canada. Welcome, Erwin and Carlos. And finally, last but not least, we have, just going around the world alphabetically, we have from Scotland, we have Arden Connor. Arden is 17 years old and has been part of the Child Human Rights Defenders and Children Parliament at the Children's Parliament in Scotland since she was 9. She has taken part in multiple projects involving children's rights, law, and policy on a national and international level, including in Scottish cabinet meetings and speaking at the United Nations in Geneva, also being part of the ICCRP for the past 3 years. As she has gotten older, she has taken more of an ambassador role at the Children's Parliament and will be studying Scots and English law and European legal studies at university after the summer. Welcome, Arden. Finally, we have Katie Logie, who's a project manager for the Child Human Rights Defenders Program at the Children's Parliament based in Edinburgh, Scotland. And she has a new puppy called Una, and her in her spare time loves wild swimming. For the last 5 years at Children's Parliament, Katie has centered her work around child's rights approach and participation. Using creative play-based approaches, she designs and facilitates consultations to gather children's views, ideas, and opinions on matters that affect them and supports them to bring those ideas to the forefront of democratic decision-making in Scotland, achieving this nationally and internationally in her work. And facilitating this discussion today will be Dr. Natasha Blanchet Cohen, the co-lead for the Policy Working Group. Dr. Blanchet Cohen is a full professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia University, and her interdisciplinary research centers on community youth development with a focus on rights-based approaches to program and services, culture, and eco-citizenship, particularly as it relates to Indigenous young people. So thank you so much for being here today. Before I pass the mic to Natasha and our panelists, I remind you to ensure that your translation caption is set up, as the conversation will be held in both English and Brazilian Portuguese. So I will drop the instructions in the chat for details if you haven't changed your setting already. Thank you. And over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Amy. Wow, hearing these bios, I feel like we already have our presentation. Like, it's so rich to see the people that are around the room. So thank you, everybody, for agreeing to be part of this conversation. I'm really excited about it. So in this webinar, the title being A Relational and Intergenerational Approach to Children's Rights, New Possibilities for Law and Policy, we really want to be thinking critically about the UNCRC, thinking about the place of relationships, both in children's rights and in policy making. Conventionally, law and policy has been identified as something that is more rule-based, logical, but more and more attention is being placed to the role of relationships. And generally, it's been something that has been an adult domain with very little space for children and young people's participation. But what is the place for children and young people's participation? What is the place of relationality and the work of different generations? So that's really the conversation that we would like to have with all these exciting experiences that you are bringing from different parts of the world. What if we view children and young people and adults as relational beings, deeply connected to their family, to their community, and their society? And how can that inform the way that we view and implement policy making? So we have identified three questions, and we're going to go around the room, around the different experiences, and hear a little snippet because I here in your bios you have very rich experiences. But we thought to start the conversation, if you could think about giving examples and contextualizing what does relationality mean for you in your experiences, in your projects, in your work. So think about something concrete, and we're going to go by pairs, these intergenerational pairs. And to begin, who would like to begin? I'm going to suggest maybe Scotland, Arden and Katie, and then maybe we could go to Canada and then Brazil, just so that you're ready, and then we'll switch it up. So, Arden and Katie, could you tell us a little bit about how you've experienced relationality in your work?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I am Katie from Children's Parliament in Scotland. A little bit of context of what Children's Parliament does. We are dedicated to the realisation of children's human rights. And this year is actually the 30th birthday of the organisation. We work with children up to the age of 14 who often face challenges in their lives and like to try and include children who are seldom heard. Our dream is that children grow up in a world of love, happiness, and understanding. And our mission is to inspire greater awareness and understanding of the power of children's human rights and support the implementation of the UNCRC across Scotland, which became Scottish law in 2024. I work within the Child Human Rights Defenders Programme, who are a group of children that we support to participate in democratic processes at local, national, and international levels. And using a child rights approach, the programme empowers children to become rights defenders, influencing policy, practice, and legislation on issues important to them and children across Scotland. And this programme is also where I met Arden about 6 years ago, 5 years ago. So I'm going to pass to her to talk a bit more about relationality in Children's Parliament.
Hi, so I'm Arden, and I think relationality in Children's Parliament always starts first with the relationship between the children and the staff at Children's Parliament. And it's to make sure that the children are comfortable enough because when you're preparing a young child to go and talk to big decision makers, it's very scary, and most children have never been asked their opinion on on these important topics that they're taking. So it's important to make sure that the child is comfortable. So this can be done in a lots of ways to develop these relationships. Typically in the projects I did when I was growing up, this was done through things like games or maybe doing some art, or we would do check-ins at the start. So we'd have lots of different photographs, sometimes of funny animals, sometimes of colors, and you'd pick one and you'd say how you were feeling and why. Another way was just chatting beforehand, afterwards, during lunch breaks, checking in how the child was doing during the meeting, if they had any anxieties, any worries, any new ideas, or even just how they were doing at the weekend. It's important to continue to do these activities throughout to maintain and strengthen these relationships. By doing this, it makes everyone feel more comfortable so they can talk and fully participate. It gives the children the confidence, makes them feel that what they have to say on these topics is important, is relevant, people want to hear. And that's something that most children haven't had and a lot of children will never get. Katie's going to talk a bit more about this from a facilitator point of view now.
Thanks, Hardin. So yeah, we work really hard to empower children to know about and understand their rights, but most importantly, we practice those rights in their everyday so that they feel them and experience them. So, for example, if we go into a school who uses Miss or Mister to address a teacher, we will make sure that we are only using our first names to create that equal standing from the beginning. We like to all sit on the floor, sometimes to people's distaste, but that again creates that equal environment. And we really focus on relationship building, like Arden just spoke about, with the children themselves, but also with their families and carers, their schools, and their community, to really create that sort of full circle approach. We really work to create a space where everyday children experience their everyday rights and leave feeling empowered and equipped to challenge those rights and make sure that they're being met in their day-to-day life. But we also work to demonstrate this to adults as well. So, with all the will in the world and all the knowledge and understanding of the CRC, adults still might not know how to practically implement children's rights in their day to day. Many decision-making adults have previously flagged nerves or trepidation about meeting with and working with children, how to share the space with them, or even how to tell a child, no, that's not something we can do. So we work to demonstrate that a child's rights approach through methods Arden and I have just listed, to empower children to own the space to share their views. But arguably, we also work to empower adults as well, to feel comfortable in stepping back, letting the child take charge, feel playful, maybe a bit silly as part of the process. And all of this makes a space where children feel confident to take part in a way that works for them. Just last year, I was in a meeting where a child decorated their glasses with lots of different craft materials, glitter and feathers and pipe cleaners, and wore them to a meeting with some of the top decision makers in the country. And one of the decision makers asked if he could have a pair of decorated glasses as well. So the child made them and the decision maker wore them for the rest of the meeting. And he actually tried to wear them for the official photo before his secretary told him not to. And this immediately created a space where the children were allowed to play. They were allowed to be a child, be themselves, even though they were in a very serious decision-making building. That willingness and openness of adults to play and meet children where they are is key in positive intergenerational relationships and work. I'm just going to pass back to Arden to finish up by sharing an example of where her experiences of intergenerational relationships supported influencing policy in Scotland.
Thank you, Katie. One of what I think is the best and the biggest examples of law and policymakers working with children and young people in Scotland is the incorporation of the UNCRC into Scots law. Children brought the idea of incorporating the UNCRC into law into Cabinet, which is where children meet, as Katie says, with some of the top decision makers in Scotland. It was also brought up in a lot of other situations, for example, at the UN for the concluding observations of children's rights in the UK, Team Scotland, which I was a part of. Luckily, was able to ask that the UN request that the UNCRC in Scots law was made a priority. Decision makers in Scotland listened to this and they worked with children and charities and lots of other important people to put the UNCRC into domestic Scots law. However, the UK Supreme Court found that it overstepped the devolved powers and they actually blocked the bill, but this didn't stop everyone. Together, they worked to redraft the bill that was now and is inserted into Scots law. So the UNCRC is now in Scots law. And I think this is a great example of actually getting to see the results of lots of activism and campaigning, which you don't often get to see. It takes a lot to put things into action, then it takes a long time for that to trickle down. So to be able to see a result of my work and so many other people's work was amazing. It also put into perspective how many people had worked towards that. There were so many decision makers and lawyers and policy makers, adults, charities, children that had worked together to put this forward. And it took a momentous effort from everyone. And it was so amazing seeing the rewards of that. Thank you.
That's it from us for now. Thanks so much.
Wow, thank you so much. I just love hearing the concrete ways that relationality was built through comfort, fun, and those feelings and emotions that are important in terms of bridging adults and young people's world and bringing about some policy change. So thank you. We're going to hear more from you later on, but I'm going to pass it on to Carlos and Erwin. If you could talk about what has relationality looked like for you in your context and your work in Canada?
All right. Thank you very much. I'm actually honored to be here with my friend, colleague, and mentor, Erwin Ellman, the Ontario Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth and former. I just want to start out by saying that without his office and without him, my work could never have been made possible. Right. At the time in my life, I would never have crossed paths with him if he hadn't have done the work that he was doing in regards to helping young people and their transition and navigation through the foster care system. Being a former youth in care myself, it's something that I couldn't really turn my back on. I was involved in it for 10 years as a child, and it impacted my life. It created an identity that I was navigating solely on my own, and I wasn't really sure about it. And meeting Irwin was kind of like meeting like the Wizard of Oz. When I arrived there, it's like he knew what I had gone through, and he knew what I was going through, and he knew what I was going to go through. And I was really in admiration, inspired. And he told me, if he asked me, do you know what inevitability means? And I said, yes. And he's like, it is inevitable that you will achieve what you want to achieve so long as you stay on this path. So, I think I've heard those words before, but coming particularly from Irwin, that really meant a lot to me. So that's kind of really ties into the relationality portion or component. Um, but furthermore, I wanna add that um, when I was involved in Irwin's office, we were taught and certified as youth advocate leaders. I was amongst a tier group called the Our Voice, Our Turn project. And these were sort of like a coalition of former youth in care gathered across the province, um, you know, um, done by the advocate's office. So, so learning about how to raise our voice through Article 12 in the UN Convention for the Rights of Children, learning how to raise our voice for the purpose of change. This goes far and this goes deep. I was actually able to evoke this article in a small dynamic in a restaurant that I used to work at. We had like a tyrant kind of manager who was just kind of abusing the heck out of employees and taking all the money for themselves, buying a BMW. But we rallied together to the owner and we spoke up for the purpose of change, which is probably, I don't know if they've ever done that before, but by the time we were done, they called the manager in and, he asked, is this true? And it got to the point where she was just like, you know what? I resign, right? She was speechless. And from that moment, we were able to sort of elevate one of our own people as a manager. And this lifted like such a huge burden off her shoulders. And, it was just like witnessing change on such a micro level and comparatively witnessing change on a macro level in terms of like the provincial government. So evoking Article 12 in the UN Convention showed me that change is possible, that change can happen. And so I sort of went on a spree as a change maker or change builder. And eventually, I went on to create something called the World Changes Society by paying attention to how policies changed by the blueprint of fundamental change that we created from the office onto the Stepping Up report, which created the priority outcomes. One of those priority outcomes was to provide at least one consistent caring adult in a young person's life. This was directly relational to the work that I was doing involving young people from care. I had found and encountered a young person straight from care. They were living on the street, they're homeless. And I knew their mother. They worked alongside me in the restaurant that I worked at. And I invited them along my journey and taught them how to become an advocate, taught them how to live independently, taught them a little bit of martial arts, taught them about finances, taught them about life skills. And eventually we created a model. After much success, we created a model evolving the 6 domains, right? So being mindful of time, just going back to an encapsulation of the World Change Society, it's an organization dedicated to helping youth transition from government care to independence by strengthening 6 domains: the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, and professional, with the purpose to provide at least one consistent and caring adult in their life, which aligns with the Stepping Up report. So in relational context, I want to add that what does relationality mean in this context? Holistic support, connections over compliance, and providing an anchor for young people. And the importance of those intergenerational partnerships, the transfer of wisdom, overcoming systemic barriers, and creating a foundation of permanence.
Mm.
And I want to add again that without this office, um, like this work that I'm doing would not have been possible. I know I had said that before, but I want to say that again. Which is why when it comes to law and policy, there's a question. I'm not sure if we should go on to question 3, but there's a question.
Carlos,
Maybe
maybe we could pass on to Erwin and keep
great.
that to the other ones because I'd love to
Or
hear you talk about Erwin, the champion,
yes.
the anchor. Erwin, what do you say about all of this?
Well, I'd say, as always, Carson, no, I'll say he gives me way too much credit. Uh, yeah, he's a talented uh, man who is his compassion drives him, and it,
And,
it's yeah, it
and
really
as,
has nothing to do with me.
and
Just
as an
about
yeah, how have you supported relationality?
yeah. Well, let me say quickly because I want to let space for other people. You know what it's really about? Respect, the three things, and this is from young people. Respect, humility, and curiosity. And that goes both ways from children and youth and adults who aren't children and youth any longer, but were. Those are the three elements, and that's it. It's not rocket science. And I'll tell you this, it's not actually about children and young people. Because relationality is, we're talking about policy. I've been around bureaucrats and politicians forever, right? Hundreds, if not thousands, in meetings. Their effectiveness is also based in relationality, how they get along with each other, how their teams operate, how they negotiate ways of thinking and seeing the world. So if there's respect, humility, and curiosity in those groups between themselves in in the people on the screen in their work, they will do better work. Isn't it? I really hesitate, and I think about Yanis Korczak, who would not separate these ideas and say, "Oh, it's all about children and youth, and not about all of us," because children and youth are us. They're not, as he said, they're people today, not people tomorrow. And yeah, I appreciate um, that we have to find ways of making sure we can each respect each other between young people and those in who are older or in positions of power and how to negotiate. That's true. Of course we do. But that's like how we should be treating all each other. And so I don't think it's rocket science. I do think it's really difficult and
Mhm.
really messy. And the other thing I'd say that Carlos is talking about is in some ways, and I didn't know what he was going to say and how he's going to frame it, but in some ways, I think that we need to realize that you can't ignore the life trajectories of the children and youth we're working with, and that when we're so interested in supporting their voice and supporting their influencing legislation, we also have to be interested in their well-being.
Mm.
I remember, Carlos, you remember in the work we've done together, there are people who are homeless. And it's not all right to just say, oh, we're going to get you in front of the minister and you're going to say some important things to the minister and feel really good about yourself. And then they go home onto the street. And so we have to realize that um, this concept of voice is related to other aspects of persons like their emotional well-being, their practical well-being, and we have to ensure that it's not respectful to not ensure that We see this as a continuum of
Mhm.
working with the person. I think that's the difference, especially working with those marginalized from their rights.
Thank you so much, Erwan and Carlos, for giving us, just the tip of the iceberg around some of the rich experiences that you have. And I can already see some parallels between what Katie and Arden was sharing around the importance that it's not just about focusing on children, it's also about adults. I mean, it's to everybody's benefit, and the importance of values of respect, humility, and curiosity are the characteristics that we need to nurture for relationality to take place. So we're going to come back to some of the challenges there when you mentioned that it's not easy. We're going to come back to that question. But I'm going to pass it on now to Carolina and Liriel from Brazil. So they're going to bring us to another experience and context. For those of you who are joining us, note that they will be speaking in Portuguese. So please ensure that you have your captions on. I think Amy will put it in the chat in order to ensure that you know how to do it. So, Carolina and Liriel, how do you experience relationality in the context of your work in Brazil?
Obrigada, Natasha. Bom dia a todos. Bom, é um prazer falar aqui com vocês, trazer um pouco, estar aqui ao lado da Liliel, minha colega do CIESP, e trazer para vocês uma pluralidade de experiências, também de idioma, da América Latina, mais especificamente do Brasil. Espero que todos estejam conseguindo compreender o que eu estou falando através das legendas. Que maravilha que a gente tem essa possibilidade da tecnologia nos dias de hoje. Bom, trazendo um pouco de contexto para vocês, Liriel e eu falamos a partir de um centro de estudos e de pesquisa associado à Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Rio de Janeiro. Nós falamos a partir do Centro Internacional de Estudos e Pesquisa sobre a Infância, o CIESP, presidido pela professora Irene Risini, que está inclusive aqui conosco hoje. O centro é dedicado ao desenvolvimento de pesquisas e projetos sociais voltados a crianças e jovens e seus elos familiares e comunitários. Eu poderia hoje trazer inúmeras experiências onde, para trazer esses elementos de relacionalidade, intergeracionalidade, mas Liriel e eu escolhemos falar a partir de duas experiências que nós tivemos dentro do próprio ICCRP. O primeiro deles, e aí eu vou iniciar falando, eu sou uma adulta de apoio já há alguns anos no Comitê Consultivo de Jovens, de Crianças, do ICCRP. Nós encerramos um apoio a uma dupla de brasileiros, Letícia e Matheus, e agora estamos com uma nova dupla, também um outro Matheus e Beatriz. Ah, e esse grupo consultivo, ele reúne, então, adolescentes e também adultos de diferentes países e contextos para contribuir coletivamente com os direcionamentos e processos do ICCRP. E eu entendo que, para além de, claro, esse espaço consultivo, como o próprio nome já traz do grupo, aqui no CESP a gente entende este comitê consultivo como uma experiência de parceria intergeracional baseada na escuta, no diálogo e na construção conjunta de conhecimento. E então eu entendo que relacionalidade vem muito disso, entender que isto de certa forma, de reconhecer que diferentes gerações, elas não possuem, elas nunca vão possuir experiências iguais, é, elas e saberes iguais, mas isso é a beleza desse processo, entendendo que todos esses saberes, conhecimentos, elas são igualmente importantes e que o trabalho se fortalece quando essas perspectivas se encontram de forma horizontal e respeitosa. Então, eu vou passar para a Liriel para falar de uma outra experiência e depois eu posso encerrar falando mais um pouquinho dessa atuação. Liriel.
Oi, gente, bom dia. Reitero os dizeres da Carolina sobre poder falar em português. Acho que isso é muito legal. E, pontualmente, o trabalho que eu desenvolvo junto com a Carolina é o Que Clima é Esse? Juventudes pela Justiça Climática. E esse projeto, ele tem como objetivo compreender como os jovens e os adolescentes aqui do Brasil, eles se sentem e fazem em relação à crise climática atualmente. E aí eu acho que isso se coloca nesse processo de relacionalidade, que a gente tem muito espaço dentro do projeto para trocar com todo mundo, para trocar com a nossa professora Irene, para trocar com a Carol, e a gente pensa todo esse conceito de crise climática a partir da gente, para a gente, mas também adquirindo saberes de quem está mais tempo pesquisando e falando sobre isso. Carol, quer complementar mais alguma coisa?
Não, eu te pediria, Liriel, para contar um pouco na prática, como que vocês fazem para esse trabalho funcionar, enfim, um pouco de dicas também para pessoas que nunca tiveram essa experiência de trabalhar com pessoas de diferentes idades.
Então, para a gente, essa ideia de relacionalidade, ela significa reconhecer que ninguém aprende e transforma o mundo sozinho. Isso acontece através de trocas, né? Porque nós somos construídos pelas relações. E não só as relações que a gente constrói em casa, mas as relações que a gente constrói na escola, nas instituições pelas quais a gente passa, e até pelo nosso próprio território, né? Eu, como mais jovem da periferia aqui do Rio de Janeiro, eu percebo que a minha trajetória é profundamente moldada por essas relações que eu estabeleci com a minha família, com o meu território, com os meus educadores, com as lideranças comunitárias também, porque aqui no Brasil essas lideranças são muito importantes e tempos depois, agora já na minha juventude, com os pesquisadores que eu conheço e troco lá no meu centro de pesquisa. Você quer que eu fale um pouquinho sobre o projeto, Carol? Ou será que a gente fala em
Pode
outro
falar,
momento?
pode falar.
Então, e aí nesse projeto, né, as nossas parcerias intergeracionais, elas foram fundamentais, né, com as pesquisadoras mais experientes, como a nossa professora Irene Rivinha, a Renata Brasil, a própria Carolina Araújo, a Carolina Terra, que está sempre com a gente, a Elisa, porque através dessa relacionalidade intergeracional, a gente cria um espaço em que as nossas vozes elas não são só ouvidas, mas elas são efetivamente incorporadas às decisões. E eu acho que hoje a juventude ela tem muita dificuldade em ser ouvida, em ser legitimada. E no desenvolver desse processo, a gente, enquanto juventude, desenvolvendo esse processo, a gente se sente muito legitimado frente às coisas que a gente vem trazendo, né? Porque a gente toma decisão sobre tudo, sobre a metodologia, sobre os produtos que a gente vai desenvolver na pesquisa, e isso traz um sentido para a gente que nós, enquanto jovens, a gente deixa apenas de ser participante desse processo. A gente não deixa, não é só coautor desse processo, mas a gente se sente criador desse processo de maneira efetiva, conduzindo as oficinas, contribuindo para a construção dos materiais e, o mais importante também, dialogando com outros jovens, né? Aproveitando a oportunidade que a gente tem dentro da funcionalidade intergeracional para passar isso para outros jovens. E aí essa experiência mostra que quanto mais diferentes gerações trabalharem juntas, com respeito, com escuta, a pesquisa se torna ainda mais democrática, né? E conectada à realidade da juventude.
Mm. Thank you so much. Carolina, did you want to add anything? It's good.
No, it's good.
Thank you, Lydiel and Carolina, for sharing about how do you create that space of intergenerationality and the work together and the importance of experiencing things, which I think is quite, there's a parallel to what Katie and Arden was saying and Carl, sorry, and Erwin. And the process as this being a process. So I'd like to turn to our next round of question. What are some challenges that you have faced, but also how have you overcome these challenges? Because I think our title of our presentation, our webinar today is around the opportunities. So yes, the challenges, but given your work and your leadership in this area, what are some opportunities to better reflect children's relationships and lived experiences in law and policy? So I'm going to pass it on to Katie and Arden if you want to share some of your insights building on your work in Scotland.
Sure, thanks. Arden, shall I start with some challenges and then you can share some successes? Does that work? Cool. Okay. Um, uh, Arden and I were talking about this through the week, and I think there is loads of things to celebrate within this, and I'll leave that to Arden. So, but I think that for me, one of the key challenges or key maybe difficulties in this area is proper investment, and I don't just mean money. I mean investment of time, investment of relationship building, investment in the well-being of the child or young person, as Erwin was saying earlier. I think a lot of people within Scotland, certainly now that the UNCRC has become law, feel an obligation to engage with children or with young people and perhaps do this in a way that isn't meaningful, that doesn't invest in their meaningful participation. So, proper investment of your time and sometimes as well, money helps, especially when working with younger children, is really important. I think there's a few ways in which this, I can go into more detail on that. One is certainly thinking about children in an equitable way rather than an equal way. Arden said something to me. I hope you don't mind me repeating you, Arden, that being a child in these spaces was just one of her characteristics. It was the same as her having brown hair. She was a child, she has brown hair. It was just part of who she was. And it's really vital that she was treated as a child in those spaces. And certainly, we've been in different environments where children are expected to understand adult content or take part in an adult space around a boardroom table. And that's not something that allows for meaningful intergenerational work because it is not a space or an environment that works for children, especially younger children. I was in a meeting not too long ago with decision makers, and one of the children that I worked with fell asleep because he didn't understand what was going on and it was boring. So he fell asleep. And so making those spaces meaningful and engaging for children is a really vital part of allowing them to participate. And the responsibility of that is not just for the children bringing in the fun, but the adults being willing to embrace that as well. I certainly think another challenge is, I suppose, particularly in a policy space, is looking at that legal perspective versus that lived experience. I think children can often speak from their lived experience, or certainly the lived experiences of those around them, of their peers. Um, and this is something that we've found consistently that decision-making adults can feel really challenged by, and they don't really see how it can relate to policy. And I think one of the challenges is that ownership and responsibility taken by adults in those spaces to be able to translate what the children are actually saying into something that can make a meaningful difference. If I'm bringing an 8-year-old into a decision-making meeting, it's not up to them to know the ins and outs of educational policy. That is the adult's role and responsibility in that space. But the child can certainly talk about their lived experience of being a child in an educational system and experiencing that process. And so certainly one of those challenges is how we translate that across from the child to the adult and back again, and making sure that that feedback is consistently happening in that cycle. Um, I think those are the kind of key challenges that me and Arden thought about, but Arden has maybe the more positive side of things and has got some successes to share and some positive examples.
Yeah, I think exactly what Katie's saying is children are children. And although I think a lot of adults underestimate their ability to understand a situation, they might not always understand it in legal jargon, but they do understand the situation. And it's important to explain it to them in a way that they can. There's a saying where if you can't explain it to 5-year-olds, you don't really know what you're talking about. And I think that's true. You can explain anything to a child if you have enough patience, and I promise you they will get it. But I think it also involves working in a way that plays to the child's strong suits. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to do something in a playful way. If you're having an important conversation, just because you're having it in a meeting room or if you're having it on a park bench, it doesn't take away from the value of what is being said. It's still equally as important. I think Children's Parliament, they specialise in working with younger children, which is something that a lot of people just completely avoid. And they're really successful in doing so because they know that they are children. They know to have games, they know to have activities. I think, especially when you're working with really young children, they sometimes struggle, or I still struggle, and I know lots of adults do, to sometimes verbalize their thoughts. So to get around this, they'll sometimes do an activity where you're drawing, or so you use keywords, and a lot of it is drawing, and that's a lot easier way to prioritize what's important, what does the child actually want to say. I remember we did lots of activities with drawing. One of the ones when I was at Cabinet, one of the activities we took was we had each person, all these important decision makers, draw a tree on their notebook, and on each of the branch they had to put a keyword for we were doing climate change in Scotland, a keyword about climate change. And an activity like that means everyone can engage. And I think it's important. There's so many ways you can do it, and I think it's important to remember that children can take part if you're willing to work with them. And everything can be translated. It doesn't matter if you're sitting down on the floor with a beanie bag or if you're on a business chair. I think it's important to actually try and work with the children, trying to think of other examples from what we've done. But there's lots of
Did you
ways
want
you
to
can do it. You
talk
can make
about
games.
Braggy?
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Katie. When I was at the UN for the concluding observations, one of the men we met was Braggy, who was a member of the UN. Before and after each of the meetings, he came over, he talked to us, he checked in, oh, are you anxious about the meeting? What are you looking forward to? And also just general things, how are you enjoying the city? He didn't run away with his briefcase to his car after the meeting. He stood and talked with us and asked us how we were doing, and it made us feel a lot more comfortable. He took photos with us, he gave us high fives, he gave us recommendations where to go for the best hot chocolate. Things like that made us feel so much more comfortable. It's so scary going to these spaces as a child where you're sitting with these important people in suits in a big room with lots of translators, and having a friendly face there that was prepared to ask you how you're doing made such a difference, especially when you don't often know lots of the people who you're with. And I think it's really important to form those connections. It shows the power of those intergenerational relationships. He was able to give us tips to say it's okay, you can relax. I've done this a million times before. It's all going to be okay. And he shared lots of wisdom with us as well, just helping us being confident as children. And I think that was really important.
Mm. Thank you, Katie and Arden, for sharing some of the challenges, but also the possibilities, the importance of investment. And I love what you're saying about this need to move away from this binary view of like just plugging children as though it's like an identity that's like the brown hair, black hair, as opposed to viewing children as possibilities, and just like adults are. There's no specific necessarily, but there is also a need to be a translator in some situations. So it's kind of a navigating act, balancing act. So, Erwin and Carlos, would you like to share as a team some of the challenges and the opportunities that you have drawn from your experience in Canada, as former youth advocate and as a change maker, Carlos?
Yeah. All right. So I'll go first and I'll let Erwin sort of follow up on it. I just want to say like I love articles of the UN Convention for the Rights of Children because and I'm so happy to see that the members on this panel are also involved in it so heavily. I want to give a shout out to Tara Collins for inviting me on this panel. Um, I honestly think invoking articles is like a superpower. I wish every young person or every person learns the conventions for human rights and the rights of children, and learns how to evoke them, because you just become a really powerful person, individual. It's very empowering. That being said, when we're talking about relational um, relationships and relational aspects. The challenges that we face here in the child welfare system is one of them is a major one. It's when a young person turns 18, they're no longer considered a young person in the eyes of the government. So the child welfare systems no longer have any jurisdiction over you. So you end up basically leaving the system abruptly, which creates kind of like a cliffhanger moment for each and every one of us, of the young people out there, hundreds. It's a cliffhanging moment where you're now kind of abruptly let go from the system. And this is a major challenge that we face. It's one of the inevitabilities that I have encountered. You know, one, a young person will come into care, and the next one, a young person will leave care. And that's like, you know, certain. So this work that we're doing highlights a critical truth that legislation and policies must institutionalize trauma-informed mentorship to prevent youth from facing the cliff of adulthood alone. Some of the challenges in prioritizing relationships and intergenerational partnerships is a systemic time constraint and burnout. A lot of the like child welfare social workers, they're frequently overburdened with high caseloads. This leaves little time to facilitate meaningful long-term intergenerational connections, reducing mentorship to brief check-ins rather than lasting bonds. The reason I say is because in my time of care, 10 years, yeah, I had a lot of social workers, and they were great people. But sometimes they weren't available, and sometimes it came down to like a meeting at like Tim Hortons where you had a coffee, and I knew what was next. I was gonna sign the paper so that they can, you know, check that off their checklist, and then that'll be it. I won't see them for the next, I don't know how long, 3 months. Um, so and that's a systemic um, you know, challenge that was faced. An example of it. Another one is yes, the aging out hurdle, 18 to 19, and also navigating the power dynamics of intergenerational partnerships, because it's adults who we need to act as peers and allies rather than authority figures. And in traditional care environments, um, breaking down these power imbalances can be difficult due to strict institutional guidelines and risk aversion protocols. Right, so necessary changes in law and policy. This was kind of like my favorite part that I was looking forward to. Three aspects: ending the arbitrary aging out cliff. Um, Policies must guarantee continuous wraparound financial, housing, and relational support up to at least age 27. No young person should be pushed into independence without a safety net. Next is mandating relational permanence. Legislation must require child welfare agencies to actively resource and track ongoing connections between youth and care and consistent caring adults. Every young person should have an explicitly named trusted adult they can turn to for advice, community, and emotional safety. And the last one that I'm going to hand it over to Erwin is integrating youth voices in lawmaking. The closure of the independent oversight bodies, such as Ontario's former provincial advocate for children and youth, removed a vital mechanism that held the government accountable to youth. Reestablishing well-funded, independent advocacy offices ensures that children's lived experiences directly shape the policies governing their lives. All right, so there are a lot of facts and evidence to support and lives that can contribute to this, but we can save that for another meeting. However, those are what I would say. So I'm going to pass it over to Erwin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. You're always an advocate, man. Holy. Um, I'm thinking about the challenges, so let me say really as quickly as I can because I have a list of them. Uh, I remember a young person saying to me over the years, I don't know how long ago, she said, uh, if it's not messy, you're probably not doing it right. And I resist kind of anybody who thinks they know what they're doing. So anybody who says, I've got the model, this is how you do this kind of work, I kind of resist it because it's messy and there's always drama. Carlos will know that from the projects he's been involved in, working with the young people and the not so young people, uh, the staff. There's always drama and there's always things to be sorted out. And sometimes, because we live in organizations that are risk averse, sometimes it's hard to deal with the drama. And the drama comes from lots of places, but one thing is that it comes because when you're doing this work with people who are using their lived experience as a legitimate source of knowledge, then the conversations automatically become real. And it's different than if I'm working with Tara, who runs this partnership, and we're talking about that. Sometimes we might not put the dramatic conversations, the difficult conversations on the table. But if we're working with people who are using lived experience as a legitimate source of knowledge, it opens the door to real difficult conversations. That's tough. It's emotional on both ends, right? And if you're not having those conversations, I don't know, then where's the relational work? Because that's part of it. I do think in the adult world, we should have those difficult conversations at our team meetings and our interagency partnership meetings and our academic. Oh my God, there's no play. I know there's some academics on the call. There's no more drama anywhere in the world than within a university and between academics. And I'm not saying anything that people don't know. So that's one challenge. A second is it's really difficult. We used to say, Carlos might remember this, you can speak for yourself and you can speak for people who gave you permission to speak for them, but you can't speak for people who didn't. And so when we're doing these projects, these initiatives, that I think is important because we still have to respect the children and young people who aren't at the table. And we can't speak for them if they're not at the table or we haven't asked them. And so we can influence, and it's important to give opportunity to young people to speak, but we have to keep that in mind and help them keep that in mind. Uh, Lived experience as a legitimate source of knowledge still is not really held because if it was, we would use it differently. I love the conversation from people of Scotland about supporting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but just supporting the people with other frameworks in the room, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the service providers, to how to make use of the knowledge that children are giving them. That's really difficult. Um, yeah, another thing that I've run into, I wonder about others and how you cope with that, especially when we're working with people who are marginalized from rights. So we work with a group of hundreds of young people with disabilities. Carl's part of a group of hundreds of young people in and from care, hundreds of First Nations young people who did their own project, hundreds, maybe not hundreds, a big group of LGBTQ2S young people, hundreds of Black young people, and all marginalized from rights. And what they find in their participation is a voice. And when you find a voice, we know one of the things about belonging is that it's a place where you feel heard and you feel understood and you feel community, a sense of community. And we're bringing together people in these projects, in this work, who don't feel that oftentimes. And so when they find it, it's not surprising they don't want to let it go. And so as they move, you want to give opportunity to other young people. How do the young people in those projects maintain their sense of belonging and wholeness and each other and are able to create space for others to come after them and use their voice? And how do we do that? Even how do old people like me who are not in that industry anymore, the child participation industry anymore, how do we create space for you guys to think and do? It's a challenge. The young people, I remember a young person saying to me, um, I go to this meeting and I feel so important and so heard when we meet with that's bureaucrats, the deputy ministers about this issue or that issue. And then I go home and I'm on the bus, the public transit bus, going to my rooming house because I'm 17 and I live by myself on my own. I got nobody. And I'm sitting in my rooming house with no food. I don't know where I'm going to pay the rent. And the gap between what I felt like in that deputy minister's meeting where everybody's saying, "Oh, look at you. You can walk and chew gum. It's amazing to hear your voice after what you're trying to overcome." And I feel so good. And now I'm sitting in my room and you guys have to remember the bus ride home. Because if you don't remember the bus ride home, you're exploiting us. Because it's not fair that we go to our room and sit in a room with a hot plate and worrying about our mental health and whether we're going to have food tomorrow. But, in a week from now, you're going to call us to another meeting with bureaucrats. That makes no sense. That's a huge challenge. Um, I think last one is it was mentioned kind of, but I think we have to, if we're going to say lived experience is a legitimate source of knowledge, that does not discount the legitimate knowledge that people who know how to make policy, who spent their life in bureaucracy and know how to make policy carry to. So one source of knowledge does not discount another. And the trick is to bridge the two. Not ask questions of young people that's patronizing, frankly, about things they might not have that source of knowledge about. That's my position. I know that's a outlandish position for some, and we don't ask people who don't have the lived experience questions about what they think the lived experience is. We meld the two sources of knowledge so that is respectful relational work. And one doesn't seek priority, one source of knowledge doesn't privilege another. They're both important sources of knowledge, extremely important sources of knowledge. I don't think we're there yet.
So, Erwin, Carlos, thank you for really bringing to our attention some the messiness and the complexity of bringing of moving forward. And it reminds me of Arden and Katie talking about the importance of working from an equitable perspective. And Carlos also in your opening about the value of the UNCRC and what it has meant to you and the opportunities that it's provided, but also some of the challenges in terms of what needs to happen in the area of child protection. And so as we move forward, I'd like to pass on to Carolina and Liriel to talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities that you've experienced in the context of Brazil and your work around climate justice.
Obrigada. Bom, eu vou falar de uma forma mais ampla, dos desafios e oportunidades, e Liriel falará de uma maneira mais focalizada no estudo de caso realizado pelo SESP em parceria com a ICCRP. Bom, então, no contexto geral, falando a partir do contexto brasileiro, Um dos principais desafios que a gente observa é que muitas vezes a participação de crianças e jovens ela ainda acontece de uma forma muito simbólica. Frequentemente, adultos continuam definindo prioridades, linguagens e formas de participação sem considerar realmente, de forma genuína, as experiências e perspectivas das crianças e dos jovens. E isso se torna ainda mais complexo, em contextos marcados por desigualdades sociais, violência e exclusão territorial, como muitas das vezes acontece, no Brasil, onde crianças e jovens, enfrentam dificuldades concretas de acesso, mobilidade, segurança e permanência nos espaços de participação. A gente acredita muito, e trabalha muito para que mudanças importantes possam ser criadas. A gente acredita, desculpa, refazendo, que as mudanças importantes elas passam por criar processos mais contínuos de escuta, de diálogo, de construção compartilhada entre as gerações e não apenas em consultas pontuais. A gente também acredita muito que é necessário fortalecer políticas que reconheçam as experiências concretas de crianças e jovens a partir de seus territórios, escolas, familiares, suas comunidades, e sempre considerando então marcadores de classe, de raça, de gênero e de território. Então, acreditamos, por fim, que é fundamental investir em formas de participação acessíveis, permanentes e realmente levadas em consideração nos processos de decisão. E acredito muito que espaços como esse são muito importantes para a gente refletir sobre a nossa prática, porque e compartilhar boas experiências também, para a gente não ficar apenas com as dificuldades, né? Gostei muito aqui que a gente está pensando a partir das oportunidades. Então, para falar um pouco mais disso, eu vou passar para a Liriel.
É isso, a gente trata, existe muito essa fragmentação das políticas públicas, né? Que tratam o clima, a educação e os direitos das infâncias como temas desconectados. E a gente acredita que para superar esses desafios, a gente precisa fortalecer esses espaços de escutas permanentes, né? Para garantir essas acessibilidades e essa valorização dessas vozes e desses saberes produzidas por essas infâncias, por essas juventudes. A comunidade e as instituições, elas devem reconhecer que as crianças e os jovens, eles não são apenas o futuro, mas eu acredito que nós já somos sujeitos políticos do presente, porque nós precisamos ser escutados. E eu acho que dentro desse projeto que a gente vem desenvolvendo, isso se coloca de uma maneira muito evidente. É isso. O debate, mais uma vez falando de clima, de educação e de direito das infâncias e da própria juventude, ainda é uma coisa muito solta, muito desconectada, colocada como se a gente fosse só o futuro, mas a gente já está sendo impactado com isso. A crise climática já impacta o nosso direito de ir e vir, o nosso acesso à cultura, as nossas oportunidades, o próprio saneamento básico, né? É uma frente da crise climática que impacta a gente todos os dias, a mobilidade urbana. E aí, quando a gente chega com toda essa troca de saberes entre gerações para poder aplicar a nossa metodologia com outros jovens, com outras infâncias, a gente traz toda essa realidade, eu acho que esse processo é muito mais efetivo, porque é isso, nós somos jovens, a gente sabe o que está acontecendo com a gente, através dessa instru instrumentalização, a gente consegue falar para outros jovens que é isso, que somos sujeitos políticos do presente, que precisamos nos articular no presente, que não é o futuro. Isso já está nos atravessando, né? Através dos dados que a gente levantou com essa pesquisa, a gente entendeu que os jovens aqui no Brasil eles não sabem que estão sofrendo com esses impactos, mesmo sendo os maiores impactados. E aí é isso, assim, através dessa troca a gente consegue perfeitamente fazer com que eles entendam que todas essas violências elas não são cotidianas. Elas são faltas de políticas públicas, né? E que não entendem que a crise climática é isso, engloba tudo isso. E a gente faz com que nos entendamos que somos
Uhum.
sujeitos políticos de agora, precisamos mudar o agora, não precisamos mudar para o futuro, que a gente já está sofrendo com isso.
Thank you, Liriel and Carolina, for really, I think the climate crisis really raises the issue of relationality and the need for working across generations in a different perspective. And the need for dialogue, for exchanging, and to consider race, gender, and class. I think Carolina, I think others have spoken about that, the need to recognize that the diversity of experiences and voices that children and young people and adults have, and to avoid categorizing one or the other. I know that I know that there's a couple of Q&A. I'm going to take this opportunity if some people attending want to ask some questions in the Q&A. But given the short time we have left, I maybe would pass on for one last 1 minute point. We always like to imagine what is possible. So 10 years from now, if children's voices and relationships across generations were fully included and prioritized in decision making, what is one real everyday difference that would make in your context? So we're going to maybe change the order here. Brazil, maybe would you like to start first? So very short, 1 minute each.
Quer começar, Leila?
Posso começar. Eu imagino que as crianças e adolescentes eles participem mais ativamente, né, dessas decisões. Quer ir me cumprimentando, Carol?
Sim?
A gente quer que esses jovens eles participem mais ativamente dessas decisões do seu território, porque a gente fica pensando muito também no global, mas a gente precisa pensar na mobilização local. A mobilização local ela tem um impacto global. Então a gente pensa que as crianças, os adolescentes, os jovens, eles participem mais ativamente dessas decisões que afetam o seu território, né? A gente queria que as escolas também funcionassem como centro de cidadania climática, onde esses estudantes aprendessem também e influenciassem essas políticas públicas, que não ficasse só numa troca entre pares, mas que eles pudessem se organizar para incidir efetivamente sobre isso. A gente imagina também um mundo com mais árvores, especialmente das periferias. A gente gostaria também de acesso a saneamento, a áreas de lazer, a uma infraestrutura capaz de proteger as comunidades de fato dos impactos climáticos. Mas, sobretudo, a gente imagina que todas as crianças possam crescer com a certeza de que a voz delas importa, né? Que elas possam olhar para as suas comunidades e perceberem que as suas ideias ajudam a transformar suas cidades, a transformar seus territórios. E para mim é essa a diferença mais concreta, né? Quando a gente passa de uma realidade em que as crianças são apenas uma consulta uma para outras, quando elas realmente se sentem protagonistas da construção de um mundo mais justo, sustentável e democrático.
Thank you, L'Oreal. Carolina,
O,
do you have anything to add?
o que falar depois de Liriel? Eu me senti super representada. Acho que podemos ficar apenas com a fala dela. Obrigada.
Katie and Arden, what do you say 10 years from now?
Arden, do you want to go?
I think I'm very similar. I hope that it's more accessible for every child and young person to put forward their opinions, and I hope that there's more consideration and consultation for all citizens when drafting new laws and policies, as well as when revising old ones. Katie?
Yeah, I think my hope would be that decision-making adults would see working with children as an opportunity, an exciting one for fresh perspectives and ideas, not an obligation that they are sort of duty-bound to follow through with.
Carlos and Erwin.
All right. Um, okay, so if children's voices and relationships were truly at the heart of our decision making, the everyday difference would be profound. Instead of young people aging out of the system and falling into isolation, they would step into adulthood surrounded by a safety net of advocates, mentors, and peers. It shifts our care system from one of management to one of genuine belonging. For society as a whole, this means fewer youth experiencing homelessness or mental health crises, and instead, we would see a generation of resilient, supported young adults actively shaping our future. We wouldn't just be saving them from falling through the cracks, we would be empowering them to thrive. Erwin?
Hmm. Um, you know what? I just want to say 10 seconds about we're the elephant in the room, which is we're in this context of a huge disruption. Our prime minister in Canada talked about this rupture of the world order, and he's thinking about economy, right? And it's true that things have shifted and changed, but it's we're in the midst of a rupture of democracy in liberal democracies. What does that mean? We don't know what truth means any longer because who knows what we're being told and by who, and we're in this immense disruption. And that includes this whole project we're all involved in around with children and their voice. It's not the same world anymore. The UN Convention on the Rights, the Committee on the Rights of the Child is on its last legs, right? You speak to the committee members, they have no money. They have many members that are not able to, not just the committee, but the member sect, the countries, able to meet the rigors of a UNCRC process. The whole concept of rights for all human beings is up in the air. It's disrupted. And we all know, I mean, we need to understand that context. And so this talk is about that. And so for me in 10 years, I really hope we take advantage of the opportunity of disruption. We we don't need to disrupt anything. It's already disrupted. So how do children and their voices help build for all of us something better rather than something worse? And believe me, something worse often looks like it's on its way. But our project is about building something better. And I think not being Pollyanna about it, that children and young people's voices can be part of that. And in order to do that, we need to, in 10 years, not have this conversation be the domain of us experts who work in this area. It needs to be everybody. It needs to be the social worker who I remember was at a meeting where young people like Carlos back in the day would be speaking about what they need to do in this mental health system. I'm not saying Carlos was in that meeting, but mental health, how could that change? What does services look like from a lived experience? And I remember the social worker saying to the young people, it's so refreshing to hear from young people. It's so important. And I remember the young person saying to them, how many people do you have on your caseload? How many children do you have on your caseload that you work with? Oh, it's really hard. We have like 30 each, and it's hard to. And she said, you have 30 children on your caseload? Don't you hear from young people every day? Oh, this is not our domain. It's that. I want that caseworker to understand this. I want the minister of education who I remember she came to me and said, how do I talk to the students? I need to hear their perspective. I go, what do you mean? You are the minister. You can walk into any school in Canada. You're in a city, go to a school and say, I'm the minister. I want to sit and talk to the class. Tell me what they think. it's I want to get in 10 years to a point where people are work are talking and listening and respecting children and their opinions and allowing that to influence their decisions. I think there's an opportunity in the disruption we're in to create that place, and it's going to be people like um I'm going to forget. I think it's Neil, and is it the person from Scotland, the I forgot her name. Tar from Scotland. What's the young person from Scotland?
Arden.
Arden. I was going to call
Arjun,
you.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Arden. It's going to be them and Carlos who are going to create that space. It's not going to be us if they can, and we need to make sure they're not feeling hopeless about that.
Well, thank you, Erwin. I think that's a great, actually, towards concluding comment around this being a period of disruption, but there's the resiliency loop that hopefully there's creative destruction and something new can emerge from that. And hearing Carlos and Lyriel's and Arden's work and commitment to voice and articulation of these issues and the experiences and lived experiences that you bring to this, I think is really inspiring. But I think also the role of those around, I think Carolina, Katie, and Erwin, all the young people have spoken about your role also in creating those spaces, opening opportunities, channels of communication, and being honest, your own humility and work of respect that you have brought into these spaces. I think the research that we've been doing in the context of the ICCRP is also bringing light to to the important role of working together in bringing about change, and that relationality brings in a different language and that hasn't been as articulated in the context of law and policy. And that is, I think, one way of moving forward in this world where, yes, indeed, it's a difficult world and there's so many serious concerns, but we have a lot of exciting work and thoughtful people who are committed, and the willingness is there in terms of investing in children's rights and working from an intergenerational perspective. We had a few questions that I would encourage maybe the speakers to follow up on around the importance of voice, specific needs around working around neurodevelopment disabilities, and some practical things. So maybe we will follow up with those contacts for future conversations. I'm gonna pass it on to Amy, but I just wanted to say, I'm so inspired by all the different works that you are doing across these different regions. And although the experiences are very different, the domains are different of work, the political context is very different. It's amazing how there's some similarities on connections, and that is, I think, the purpose of the ICCRP is really to share and create those spaces so that we can support each other in this difficult world. So, Amy, I'm going to pass it on to you for the concluding comments.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, all of you who spoke today passionately and gave us more details around your context, and for all of you who are joining us online and listening. I just wanted to highlight a few things building on what Natasha said. Some of the notes that I was taking and really powerful remarks. One, that it's not just about children and youth, it's about all of us. Children and youth are people of today and tomorrow. And so we need to really focus on our lived experience as a legitimate form of knowledge. And our lives are complex. And if it's not messy, we're not doing this work right. And so because it's messy, we really need to focus on having and being prepared for difficult conversations, which are emotional and tough. And that's where the relational work really emerges. Liriel, you mentioned how we need to we talk about children's rights often globally, but this is about local work, the work at very small in small places, and so hence the importance of raising our individual stories. And Katie and Arden, you shared how seeing we need to also shift how we consider working with children and young people as an opportunity, not as an obligation. Likewise, Carlos, you mentioned stepping into adulthood is not one of is not something to manage, but it's a question of belonging. So we are not just participants in this process, but we need to think about this co-living and relational experience as being co-authors of the communities that we live in. And finally, to take up this opportunity for disruption. I'm reminded of how Katie and Arden, you started. We need to be more open to joy and love and humility, sitting on the floor together. And perhaps disruption is putting on those funny glasses, whether we're adults or young people, and having conversations where we see each other, feel each other, and hear each other. On behalf of the Policy Working Group, we'd really like to thank all of you for joining us today, and a particular round of applause to our panelists coming from Brazil, from Scotland, and from Canada. And thank you to Natasha for moderating. We will be posting the recording on our website and sharing it with all of you who registered so that you can have access to a recording afterwards. We will also be developing a little two-pager summary of the key ideas that came out today so that you can have as a record. As a final note, we'd love to hear from all of you who attended. There will be a poll that emerges on your screen. Thank you for submitting your responses and letting us know what you thought so that we can capture your ideas and ensure that they're folded into future activities and considerations from the Policy Working Group. Thank you so much, and we look forward to engaging with all of you next time online.
Thank you very much.
So
Thank you so much.
I'd love to be in
Feedback.
touch with. Can you share the emails of the people who are on this presentation? I'd love to thank
Oh,
them
yes.
and be in
It
touch
was
with
sorry.
Scotland.
It was an honor to be on this panel, by the way.
An honor to have you with us as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And Erwin, it was great to see you again, man.
Yeah, anytime, Carlos.
Yeah.
You know where I am.
Yeah.
In my basement.
thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye. I will be in touch online. Thank you so much.
We still have
sorry, we're still recording, and so we'll cut this off after, but